So welcome to the Innovator Spotlight series. I'm Neha, a product reviewer at Software Finder, and we're really excited to have you here today. So Josh, let's start from the beginning. Can you tell us the story behind HiBob and what inspired its creation?
So just taking a step back, I'm Josh, head of product marketing here at HiBob. I've been at the company for, say, just under 2 years now. And I think HiBob was born out of a really interesting place where the co-founders were a little bit tired of the industry standards of boring software, of software that was clunky, hard to use. And they decided to build something new, to build something that was more consumerized, that was more consumer friendly in the HR space specifically. So they were looking at how do we make these complicated, these robust processes more accessible, bringing in Instagram on the front end and the complex platform on the back end. So making everything a lot more intuitive, easy to find. And that's how HiBob was born, moving into that space, into that vacuum that exists in the industry.
And what would you say in terms of businesses by size or industry get the most value out of HiBob?
So I think we'd definitely say the mid-market space is our happy place up until now. We do have customers that are as small as 20 employees and as big as 10,000 employees. But I'd say the biggest clustering is probably around the mid-market, because what we found is that we're able to grow with our customers, that companies can start using us when they're 50 employees, and they're able to never stop using us. They're able to grow to 5,000, 6,000 employees and still be using HiBob. So we've taken those two seemingly contradicting principles of the complexity and the sophistication of those enterprise workflows with the simplicity and the ease of use that comes with the SMB software. We've merged them together and brought something new to the space.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that. When you're talking about how HiBob is different from other tools in the market, what would you say separates you from your competitors?
So I think it's exactly that. It's that we're the seemingly impossible contradiction about how do we make the most complex workflows that exist in the HR space? How do we make them feel easier? How do we make them easier to use? How do we make them unified in the same house and make them easy, as if you were an SMB? So that enterprise-grade sophistication without any of that enterprise-grade dead weight.
And are there any specific features that you think help you in this?
I think features, it's interesting you mentioned features. I think this has been a very big debate, and we're talking, I think with AI, features, you can build a feature in a day now. Features are no longer the moats that they used to be in previous years. And I think it all comes back to philosophies. And what are the philosophies that keep us unique? I think one is the people-centric nature of how we built the product. So when we built it, we didn't just build it for the admins. We built it for everybody in the company that has to use HR software, that has to request time off, that has to receive a paycheck and try and understand it, has to do a performance review. We built things very much bottom up. And what we're seeing is now with AI, the user adoption is more important than ever before. So because we built it from the ground up and we built it users first and not just admins first, is we're seeing everybody's adopting it now that AI is becoming more and more prevalent.
And is there something you do in terms of collecting feedback from users that helps you in this, developing the product in a way that actually benefits the user?
It's just listening. It's actually having these genuine relationships. And I'll give a shout out to Harshil, our community manager. We have a very booming community called Hardcore HR. And I think it's probably one of the most engaging communities I've ever seen. I've been in a lot of software companies, and I've never seen anything like this community, that people are asking each other for feedback. They're giving each other tips. They're helping one another. They're coming to these events. They want to be a part of it. We have people creating user groups independent of HiBob, that they want to just meet up. They want to talk about our product. And I think the overriding emotion is actually people love to work with HiBob. If you go through social media and you search on LinkedIn HiBob, you'll see a ton of people popping sparklers and celebrating when they launch HiBob in their companies. And I don't know if I've seen that for any other products.
That's really interesting to hear, because that isn't something you hear often in HR software. Is there a specific story you want to share of a company that really saw a difference using HiBob?
Wow. I think the top one on the top of my mind, and the one that I get the most excited about, is anyone who's a football fan or a soccer fan, if you're in the US, is watching Fulham Football Club in the Premier League, and having seen the HiBob logo on their sleeve and having seen how HiBob has become an integral partner in everything that they're doing, in how they're working on performance and thinking about HR, even as a professional football club. That's been something really incredible. And just also being a part of something that's so in the public eye and being able to do all of these great activities with them, I think that, for me, that one of the big highlights of the year.
That was actually a really interesting story. I've never heard anybody talk about football in terms of when they're talking about companies that are using their product. So just so we have complete clarity, when you're talking about all of the things that HiBob does within the HR space, do you want to maybe touch on the modules that HiBob has for our users?
Yeah, sure. I think we do everything from what we call hire to retire. So when the first person, the planning starts at the beginning of the year. We have our workforce planning and our financial planning and analysis products, which help you kind of look at the year from a holistic perspective and say, these are the headcount plans that we have in mind. This is the budgets we have allocated to each department. Start off with workforce planning. That data from workforce planning is then pushed directly into your hiring product. So once you have the budgets approved and the headcount and the roles approved in workforce planning, you push that through to hiring, your applicant tracking system area of the product. Hiring is the first step in many people's journeys where they encounter HiBob. And then once you've been hired and you're been accepted, you're pushed through to our core product, which is the base layer of everything that happens. And that's where the onboarding and the detail capture all happens inside the core product. So you fill out your details, you create a profile, your manager can post a shout out, welcoming you to the company. So that often happens in the core product. The analytics, the workflows, the data, everything that is related to the employee lifecycle lives within that core product. And that's the engine that powers everything else. Yeah, so then from the core product, the information is pushed, think about from the employee lifecycle, you could be pushed through to a learning and development course to help you progress in your company. So we have an LMS, we have the learning management system. We have the performance review system after that. So we can look at the skills, how you're developing, be able to use that system to also plan succession planning, career developments, everything around that. We have the company surveys, being able to get a sense of what is the pulse in the company. Are people happy? Are things working well? We also have the reward system. So compensation management, being able to say, okay, these are the top performers from the performance cycle. Information gets pushed straight through to compensation management, where people can be promoted, they can be rewarded and given pay rises. And then probably most importantly, people can get paid, because I think none of us are working for free. So getting your paycheck, I think, is probably the most important part at the end of this whole journey.
So it sounds like the key differentiator for HiBob is how well integrated your different modules are, which I know is a huge plus point for a lot of users. But often buyers ask us whether it is possible for them to purchase independent modules and whether independent modules function well within themselves. What would you say to that?
Yeah. So the baseline model of HiBob is that we have the core product, which is the base of everything. That's the data layer, the metadata, the workflows, the business logic. Everything lives in core. Then on top of that, you can buy any individual product, and each product is a world in and of itself. So our hiring product is great in and of itself. Our learning management, talent products, all these products work superbly by themselves. But like you said it yourself, they work better together.
So HiBob recently launched Bob Finance. What would you say was the reason behind that?
I think for a lot of knowledge companies and a lot of companies where people are the main core of the business, it's like software companies, tech companies, consulting companies, all these different types of companies, people make up the most significant expense sets or the most expensive asset that these companies have. So if we can tie in the people-related financial planning directly to the HR system, that's invaluable, because I think when the people plans and the HR plans sitting at the same table, even as early as today, we heard from a CHRO of a very big Italian manufacturing company that there's two different realities almost with finance and with HR. That finance starts counting the calendar month at a certain date, HR starts counting at a different date. How do we create a shared truth so that the company can operate more efficiently? I think that there's a lot of unlocks and a lot of value that is coming from when the CHRO and the CFO can read from the same data set, that the people plans and the HR plans and the finance plans become the same plans that run the whole business. So there's a lot of strategic unlocks that came from that.
That's really interesting. Are there situations where you'd say HiBob might not be the right fit for a company?
I think there's always situations. And again, there's always fringe cases. There's always deals that we'd want to close out. I don't think we're the best solution for blue collar work where you have a very big blue collar shift-based workforce, because a lot of our focus is around these, I'd say more of the tech lifecycle, the knowledge worker lifecycle, performance reviews of the compensation cycles, which is not to say we don't have a lot of customers in those segments, but it's not by no means the areas that we're the strongest in. That there's probably other solutions that might be a bit stronger, but you'd be compromising on how modern they are, because those solutions tend to be a lot more rigid, a lot more structured for massive workforce.
I know HiBob focuses a lot on AI-assisted workflows, and our buyers certainly have a lot of questions about agentic HR. Could you describe the line between AI-assisted HR and agentic HR?
First of all, I don't think one is better or worse. That people are saying agentic AI because they think that should be the gold standard of everything that we do as a business. When in reality, especially with people-related decisions and especially with regulation, and we're seeing this in a lot of different regions, there always needs to be a human in the loop. So when we're thinking about AI-assisted workflows versus agentic workflows, there are certain repetitive tasks. So for example, employee onboarding, where there's no reason that an agent can't manage the document collection, the manual sides of this role. Things like answering HR-related support questions. How do we help people be able to find answers to questions that they're looking for? Those are things that are great. Automate those, have an agent in the loop there, be able to try and solve those problems. But then when we're talking about things like promotions, when we're talking about things like people's livelihoods are being at stake, I think that there's an ethical and both a human responsibility to have AI-assisted workflows where, sure, we can summarize this performance review, we can summarize this document, we can have a grading system on top of the CVs, which complies with the laws, but there always needs to be a human in the loop with those types of discussions. And I think it's something very important to remember that even as we're optimizing for efficiency, there also needs to be humanity and ethics that need to be part of that equation.
It's interesting that you bring up the role that people play in an AI workflow. This is the question that a lot of users have. So for example, if an AI-driven process contributes to, say, a biased promotion cycle or a wrongful termination, how do you audit that decision and who is held responsible when you're using AI to this degree?
I think every company is going to have to audit them for themselves because, again, there's so much shadow AI, there's so many AI processes in place. As a vendor, we can give our customers the tools, but we're not always going to be in the room to tell them how to use those tools and to be able to ensure that they don't get misused. We put the guardrails in place. We put the barriers in place to make sure that they're not misused. But every employer needs to be able to know what the ethics are and know how to approach these themselves. And that's something that can't be overlooked, that the training is just as important as the tools that they're using.
Is there something that Bob AI does in terms of training HR leaders on how to use AI?
Yeah. So I think it's a big part of what we're trying to push now through our community, through creating different workforces, is having these discussions and be able to facilitate webinars and more information on these to help enrich our customers and help them understand the realities of, for example, what is a zero retention policy and why is that important? All these different things with AI that make it safer to use and make it more friendly for our customers to use. So giving them the tools to ask the right questions.
So the line between how far AI should play a role in HR is something that we talk a lot about. For example, there's a big difference between an AI copilot that assists and an AI agent that acts autonomously. Where would you say Bob AI sits on that spectrum today?
So I think, again, back to what I said before, is that it's all use case dependent, that we'll have certain use cases already in the product that are agentic, that we want to have an agent running and retrieving and doing a certain element of that workflow by itself. Then there's certain other workflows that there is no way in hell that we put like an agent in charge of sorting CVs and deciding who to hire for the company. So there's always going to be that balance. So for example, a use case like ticket deflection and being able to answer questions. That is a classic example of looking at the documentation, understanding which policies that employee is assigned to, and then offering answers. If they're unable to answer that, then escalating it to the HR team. That is a great use case. So I think it's all very dependent on where we want to focus our attention.
Are there tasks that you think aren't ready for agent-level automation right now?
The question of ready, that's always the big debate. Like, what does ready mean? Is that like, sure, it could do it, but it could do it badly. So I think that when in doubt, have a human in the loop, or not even when in doubt, is that for HR use cases, the default should be to have a human in the loop. I think there was something from IBM in the 1970s, maybe 1979, where they said a computer can't be held accountable, therefore a computer can never make a management decision. And that same principle applies today, is that if the AI can't be held accountable for a decision that it's making, then it shouldn't be making that decision in the first place.
That's definitely very insightful. And I think something that our HR leaders think a lot about. How far should we use AI and where should we stop? So another question that has come up recently is that agentic systems often rely on high volumes of clean data. At what level do you think an organization is ready to fully integrate AI versus at what level should they rely more on manual processes?
So I think with content creation or document creation, I think AI is already there. Like we can use AI to create the documents. And I don't think that needs to be a manual process. I think there needs to be a manual editing process and a manual review process. So I think that's maybe where that line should be drawn, is that let the AI create the content, sure, but then have a human being check that content afterwards. Is this good? Is this bad? And I think that that's the interesting skill set of where we're moving into with people is, are people curious? Do they know what good looks like? Do they know how to think critically when looking at AI created content? And that's where I think the people need to be trained more, and the skill sets that need to be emphasized more when hiring people in today's era.
So one of the areas that is being called a big near-term use case for agentic AI is recruiting. HiBob doesn't have a native ATS. Is that a purposeful decision?
So the ATS not being agentic is by design. I think if we look specifically like in the EU, so the European AI Act, it's now becoming illegal to have that AI making those decisions about the employment or unemployment of people. So AI is not allowed to make those decisions. It's not by law in the EU. It's one of those at-risk or high-risk AI activities. So whether it be performance reviews or whether it be hiring, it's just a blanket list. You're not allowed to have AI that might introduce a level of bias or discrimination. There are certain areas where you can introduce AI. So for example, looking at CVs and looking at the job description and then giving a score about how highly does the CV match the skills mentioned in the job description. So there are certain AI elements you can introduce to it, but it will never be fully agentic.
When we're talking about the role of AI and also just adding features in general, is there something on the HiBob roadmap that you're excited about for 2026?
Wow, there's so many things I'm excited about. First of all, we're launching our Bob Companion, which is going to be our agent of agents. There's a lot of exciting hype around that. There's a lot coming from that. But I think the biggest one that I'm excited for is the Bob Studio. So if you'll see it on our website, we're talking about the Bob Studio. This is the ability to vibe code your own tools inside the HiBob space, to be able to take workflows, be able to take data from inside the HiBob system and build your own custom HR tools in our system based on the guidelines, based on the data and the workflows that already exist over there.
And will this have oversight built into the system?
Yes, 100%. As with everything within our AI, we have our guiding pillars of AI compliance, and it will 100% be within those guidelines.
And when it comes to HR leaders looking for a software in 2026, what advice would you give people?
I think it's very much about how fast can your software provider adapt, and that there's always going to be changes in the market. So when you're picking a provider that is very rigid and is very set in their ways and is maybe very far down the line, they're not going to be able to turn around very quickly. And mergers and acquisitions can only get certain companies so far. So I think it's about the agility, but also at the same time, it needs to be balanced with industry expertise. So if you have someone who's agile and has the industry expertise, that's the best combination in the current market.
Okay, and when it comes to how teams have adapted to the use of AI in HR, is there a specific area where you saw huge pushback from HR managers and leaders?
So we did an analysis actually of our customer base, of our prospects, and we kind of broke it down into 3 levels of AI maturity. The most basic level is, can we use AI? Is AI safe for us to use? The middle bucket is, how can we use AI to do our jobs faster and more effectively? And then the top bucket of the highest sophistication level is, how can we build agentic workflows so that the AI will do the work for us? And what we're seeing is that 30% are in the bottom bucket. The majority, 30%, are still at the place where they're looking at how can we use this AI safely. 60% are in the middle bucket, though. 60% of people are trying to optimize and improve the way that they use AI. And then 10% are in that top bucket and trying to optimize it for efficiency and use it for agentic workflows.
What advice would you give to the people who fall in each of these 3 buckets?
It's not necessarily advice. It's more about just being curious, looking at what's out there and not being afraid to create certain areas in your company that are willing to experiment. I'm not saying that you have to roll everything out into the whole company in day one, but create an AI team. That's probably the best advice I can give is, build a designated AI team that has jurisdiction to experiment with AI, to roll it out, to select users inside the company. We have a great team here at HiBob called the AI Minds team, and they're designated with building out these projects, building out the pilots, validating them, checking them for safety and compliance. And once they're happy with them, then rolling them out to the rest of the company. And I think that that's what most companies need to think about now in 2026.
Is there anything you'd like to add about where you see the market headed in terms of how HR software is developing?
I think the biggest thing to keep an eye on is MCPs. We're very heavily working on this at the moment, but model context protocols or tools that you can use to connect your software system to Claude or to ChatGPT or to Microsoft Copilot. How can we bring the system into the daily work tools to make it more accessible and to make it more embedded in day-to-day work? So I think that there'll be a lot of moves in the HR space in 2026 around MCPs.